Hello, everyone. My name is Manny Skevofilax. I am an outsourced chief financial officer with Portal CFO Consulting. Welcome to today's webinar, which is called How to Avoid the 8 Growth Mistakes That Kill Profits. You are welcome to raise your hand at any time to ask questions, and I will try to keep this moving um, smoothly and not make it boring. So without further ado, mistake number one. Mistake number one would be setting unreasonable growth goals. So what does that mean to you as a business owner? But we all set goals for our business. I would like to grow, for example, 10% of my top line revenue this year. Others want to grow 20%. Others want to grow 30%. So what might be a reasonable growth goal for you might be a completely unreasonable goal for me. And here's what happens. When you put a growth goal that you want to grow your business by 50% this year, and it places an unreasonable burden on your business. So do you staff up to meet the growth goal before the sales start coming in, right? That can be a recipe for trouble. So the point here is that it creates a lot of unnecessary stress, first and foremost on the employees in your business, and second, and more important, you. There's a lot to keep track of. So you have to make sure that you are fully prepared, that you have the right people, the right processes, and the right capital in order to grow your revenue, for example, 50%, next year. So if you're not successful, you will burn everybody out. So that would be number one. Make sure that your growth goal is reasonable. Number two, and I still suffer from this my whole career. Focusing on shiny new toys. All right. So you get together, you make a plan, you're saying, okay, I'm going to do this in the next 90 days. All right. Everything's fine, dandy, plan looks good. And then 45 days in, you see something that catches your eye, and that's the shiny new toy. And you're like, what is that over there? And it ends up distracting you. So you're halfway through your plan that you worked very hard to put together, and something new comes on the scene. So it can impede your focus, makes you take your eye off the ball. So do your best to stay focused and stick it out so you can finish your 90-day plan. But I'd like to share it with one caveat that if you make a plan, let's just say it's a 90-day plan, and you're 45 days in it and it's not working, for example, you run into some kind of cash crunch, or maybe you see that your profits are not going in the right direction, by all means, stop everything and change it. That would be the exception. All right. The third one, and this one is probably one of my biggest hot buttons. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and they're so busy that they don't want to stop what they're doing once a month to check on their stated goals. So for example, during the month of October, you planned for, let's just say, $1 million in gross revenue with a 45% gross profit margin, and you hope to net 15% pre-tax. All right. So let's stop and take a look at that. Did that really happen this month? So that's the biggest single thing. If you don't stop, how do you know that you're making progress towards your goal? And I get the same excuse all the time when I first start working with clients. They're like, oh, I'm too busy. I'm too busy. I don't have time for this. But after they get used to doing a quick review, it only takes about an hour at most to do a financial review the same way Your banker looks at you same way an investor would look at you. And you're able to spot negative trends before they take root. So always do your best to stop once a month and do a quick run through on your financials and make sure everything's on point. All right, next, that's actually another hot button. Actually, one second. Here we go. Hiring the wrong people for the job and then keeping them on. So hiring is a very delicate topic because we're dealing with people's emotions, both the employer's emotions and the employee's emotions, and it's a complicated thing to do. So you hire an employee, you put them hopefully on a 90-day probationary period where you have presented them with a job description. And I recommend the outcomes, three outcomes that you want you want that employee to complete every month, three things. And if that employee is not meeting those three outcomes every month, then you need to have a conversation with them. And what I found is, for many, many reasons, employers hire a person, that person ends up not doing particularly well in the position, and then the employer doesn't want to take action. So what happens there is animosity builds with the other members of the team. If you've got Manny in there and he's not pulling his weight, it can be very, very dangerous to the morale of your team and very dangerous to you because you're wasting time, effort, and capital on an employee that's not getting it. I recommend that you try to redeploy that employee, if possible, in your organization. Maybe you have hired that person and you got the wrong butt in the wrong seat. Before you look to lay them off, for example, if you've got an employee that's coming to work on time, shows up every day, is presentable, then you want to try your best to retain them in the organization instead of just letting them go because they weren't able to cut this one thing. There's so many things that go wrong. You didn't train them right. The person that you put in charge of training and the new employee didn't like the employee. There's a whole bunch of things. So we want to follow the old adage, which is hire slow and fire fast. So do not hire these people. You're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing that employee a disservice because you're both going to be unhappy. All right. Here's another interesting one. This one is number 5, running excessive overhead. So it is very easy to take on new expenses every month. It's like the easiest thing, right? You want some kind of super cable package at the office, call Comcast and upgrade. You want a new car, you go buy one, you finance it. Here's a new monthly payment. There's all different ways that you can easily grow your overhead before you grow your revenue. And the interesting thing is that we always know what our expenses are every month to the penny. If you are in a transaction-oriented business model as opposed to contracts, you don't really know what your revenue is going to be every month. So it's a real easy way to get yourself in trouble by boosting the overhead in your business every month. And it can cause you to have a cash crunch. So pay particular attention on the amount of overhead that you're running in your business. Now, keep in mind, later, when you are wildly profitable and you've got plenty of cash, then go spend some money. But in the meantime, try to play that one as conservatively as possible. Speaking of plenty of money, brings us to the next one, number 6, lacking sufficient working capital. So what happens is everybody, for the most part, is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is an old concept that said that we were going to pull ourselves up to prosperity by our bootstraps, which is fascinating because I don't think it's possible to pull yourself out by your bootstraps, but that's a different story. Anyway, you start a business, you're excited, you're probably undercapitalized because in America, it's pretty easy. And there are some very low barriers to entry, especially if you want to start a service company. But you need to be very careful and very mindful that you really don't have a whole lot of capital to be able to make investments in your business. And you've got to be very careful every month until you start generating profits and are able to keep some of those profits in the business every month. For example, if you made, $50,000 this month net before tax, you don't want to pay the tax man. Let's just say it's 30% or 15 grand. Let's say you got 35 grand left over. You don't want to take the whole $35,000 out of the company, which is what I see a lot of business owners do. You want to try to at least keep half of it in the company. And that's 17 and a half thousand, half of the 35. You just created your own new capital by yourself. You didn't have to go to a bank to borrow. You didn't have to go to an investor, right, to give up a piece of your equity pie. That's how you create your own money. So be very cognizant because it'll keep you on a never-ending chase for money if you don't, and that's never fun. All right, number 7, not testing the market. So this is a challenge that I had early on in my career. You're not talking to your customers about what they want. So even though I worked as a banker for 10 years and I went through a training program and started at the bottom of a bank and worked my way up, even after 10 years, I did not know that customers are afraid to talk to their bankers. I did not find this out until 2008 when I was a consultant. I was like in year 5 of my business. We had an economic downturn. And I was just sitting there matter-of-factly telling my clients, that's okay, give your banker a call and, have this conversation. And they were like, I don't want to talk to them. So I learned a valuable lesson, which created a new business line for me called bank relations. So what is my point? If you're sitting around with your team and you're brainstorming, go ask your existing customers, hey, are there any other ways that I could potentially add value, to your operation? Go and ask them before you commit your time, your effort, and your capital to, some endeavor that you really don't understand how much risk you're taking on. I think there's nothing worse than offering a product or a service to a customer that's not interested in it. So by all means, develop a nice relationship with your client, have excellent communication, and go in there and ask them, what else can I do for you? How else can I add value? It will save you a lot of headaches and save you from wasting a lot of time. All right. And we have quickly reached our number 8, which is called underpricing your products and services. This one is a difficult one and one that I've had a hard time learning, but I've gotten better at it over the years. So underpricing doesn't just lead to lower margins in your business. It ends up driving a perception of lower value. What does that mean? So when a customer sees that you're more expensive to do business with than the next guy in your field, that automatically shows that you're better. It's the way we are as human beings. So you don't want to underprice or compete on price because that now becomes a commodity game. So, for example, gasoline is a commodity. There are some people, gas is available in every corner. It's easy to get. Therefore, people are price sensitive. You don't want to be involved in commodity pricing in their business because they said that commodity pricing is a race to the bottom. What you want to do is compete on value. And then you need to learn how to get your value. And that is the challenge that I had early on when I first started my firm 22 years ago. I I was afraid to ask for my value. I didn't have the enough of self-esteem. I was afraid and I didn't value my service. So for example, I would go and give a client a recommendation and that recommendation saved them $200,000, you know, and I might have billed them 250 bucks. So the equation there wasn't mutually beneficial. So I switched to value-based pricing. It wasn't overnight. It took a long time. So now my fee is based on the um, my contribution to the results that we achieve together with a dramatic return on investment for you and equitable compensation for me. So if I'm doing a project for a client and we identify that the value to the firm is $450,000 in the first year, I am going to quote $45,000 as my fee. So you just got to get comfortable. You got to get confident with that and, not sell yourself short. The other thing, which I really had a hard time understanding, but it's definitely proven out over time. I'm in my 22nd year in this business. If you're not pricing appropriately for your value, you're leaving money on the table. And if you leave 20 grand on the table, which I most certainly have left 20 grand on the table in a year, over 22 years, that's $440,000 that I will never be able to get back. So a word to the wise, always make sure that you're, appropriately pricing your products. Appropriately means there's market driven things. My point here is that you're not on the commodity side trying to be the cheapest guy in town because cheap does not drive a perception of value. So always be very cognizant of that. All right, some final tips and takeaways. So over time, I always kept seeing the same thing over and over again. 10 years as a banker, 22 years as a consultant, 32 years I'm watching the same movie. Why does the company that grows 10, 15%, 20% a year, why, and they maintain their profits, why are they building something that lasts and their employees are happy? They're able to give their employees raises, bonuses. That business owner is able to give, take care of their family. They're able to donate, make their charitable donations to their community. Why is that business successful? And then the other business over there that insists on trying to double the size of the business every year or 50% or some unreasonable goal, and they end up in cash crunches because they're losing money and they're constantly trying to chase down debt. Why do they go out of business? So what I learned is that slow and steady truly wins the race. If you want to build something sustainable, a business that's going to last. What did you really gain if you busted your butt for 5 years, put all your time, effort, and capital in, didn't make any money because you were chasing growth, and then you went out of business? So slow and steady. And then, by the way, growth doesn't just happen. It is first and foremost, you're fulfilling a need for a client and they want more of it. That's what it is. They find value in dealing with you. That's how you differentiate yourself from your competitor. And then right underneath that, these are not always glamorous things that are going on, okay? They're not sexy. They're literally boring and repetitive actions. So if you're good with that and you're, a good project manager and you're able to handle boring and repetitive actions, that's going to help you build a sustainable business. The other thing I mentioned was this, avoid the high growth, no profit strategy. I can't stand it. So we have tech companies. They don't make any money initially. They might not make money for 3 or 4 or 5 years because they need to reach a critical mass of subscribers, blah, blah, blah. Great. However, the difference between them and my business, which I'm bootstrapping, is that they have outside investors. Those outside investors control the business. They own at least 51% of it in most cases. And they are content to watch this thing lose money and fund it as long as it's hitting those eyeball metrics, every quarter. Well, you don't have that benefit when you're a bootstrapping entrepreneur. So you've got to make sure Get the first profitable client. What were the metrics on that, right? How much time did you have in it? What was the gross profit margin? Then go find the next one with exactly that same model. It's not rocket science. So profitable growth and avoid the, you know, I added on 1 million in revenue, but I didn't make any more money. And then last but not least, be careful what you wish for. So business is like a box of chocolates. You really don't know what you're going to get on any given day. For example, COVID, it came out of left field. Nobody could have reasonably predicted that our government in the United States would arbitrarily determine that my business was essential to stay open and yours was not. I mean, that is the craziest thing ever. So be careful, and be prepared, because if you want a big business, you're going to have to put a lot of time and effort and capital into it. It's not as easy as you think, so just be careful what you wish for. And then little things along the way that I've found is, continue improving. Small improvements carry the day, right? There's a lot of people out there that say all you need to do is get better, 1% better a day, and you get 70% better in 60 days, right? Do the math on that. That's kind of cool. And then seek feedback. So when I first started my consulting business, I was not seeking feedback from my clients. But as I grew and got more confident, I was like, look, they're human beings just like me. And I started asking for feedback. Hey, what do you like about me? What don't you like? What's valuable? What do you think's a waste of time? All I'm trying to do is get leaner and meaner and more valuable to my client, which is going to lead to excellent referrals. And then, reflect on your performance. Are you happy? Are you sad? Is the business meeting your expectations? Right? These are things you need to be asking yourself. Explore new techniques, new ways of being efficient. We live in the greatest time ever. When I first started out, we were doing accounting by hand. So you would go into an office where the accounting department was, and all you would see was typewriters, notepads. There wasn't a computer to be seen, and rows and rows and rows of file cabinets full of paper. It's crazy. One of my first jobs back in 1986, I was in college, and it was to convert um, businesses to automation, office automation. So my business partner and I were going into this belt manufacturer, and we were installing something called a Novell network back then, a little local area network, and teaching them how to use something called WordPerfect and Lotus 1-2-3. So explore new stuff. There is so much software, so many efficiency tools these days. I couldn't do my job. Okay. I have a nationwide practice, and I am able to deal with customers not only nationwide, but overseas because of this Zoom tool. WebEx used to be too complicated 30 years ago. It was only for big companies that had, in-house departments where they could call Manny the IT guy because we can't log in. Well, the smaller, rapidly growing companies don't have that benefit, but I'll be darned if Zoom didn't figure it out. So harness these new techniques, this new technology that's available. And then, set personal goals for yourself. That's something that I had a hard time with early on, but I got better at it. Without setting goals, you're like a ship in the water without a rudder. The engine's running, but it isn't going in any particular direction. And then one of my favorites, and this was taught to me by an engineer many years ago, and I think it was like the mantra inside of this like defense contractor, right? Iterate and adapt, which I found very fascinating, So in plain English, right? If you see something's not working, just change it. Just change it. All right. So thank you very much for participating. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd be delighted to answer any questions anybody has. And At your convenience, I'd like to direct you to my website, which is portalcfo.com. I've been blogging for over 15 years. So I have, learned something from my teachers and mentors on pretty much every topic of business you can imagine. So I've written something down and I got my IT guy to make it searchable. So you can go in there and, type in the search box what you're looking for, and, 10 or so articles on that topic will pop up. So that's a nice free resource where you can learn from my mistakes. And then I also have something called a profit studio where when I was growing up, I just didn't want to be poor because I come from a poor family. I'm the son of immigrants. And I didn't, you know, I didn't get the training, right? My parents and everybody that I knew that immigrated, they were focused on survival, okay? Not worrying about how to build a career and all that stuff. So I have created 4 courses that I think are like the 4 most important things you need as an entrepreneur to build passive income, to scale a business, to learn how to budget. And these are like in my opinion, the 4 most important tools that will come in handy for you, as you continue your entrepreneurial journey. And then I also got lucky and wrote a book, Ultimate Profit Management, maximizing profitability as you grow your business, which encompasses everything that my teachers and mentors taught me. And all those, I give you good examples in there of why that slow and steady wins the race. So if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand.